Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, everybody. This is Robert Winfrey, and this is another tribute show. I know I can practically hear you at home right now screaming, but we just had one of those 2 days ago. Mark and his wife Melissa and Pat were on to talk about David Bowie, listen to some of his songs, reminisce, because he passed away. What are you doing here? Well, same frickin' week. Alan Rickman, a truly gifted actor, passed away a couple of days ago. Might have been yesterday. Yesterday we got the news. Sorry. I'm not sure about when exactly it happened, but that's family stuff, so that's... at the moment I'm marking it from when it actually happened. And, you know, that means we all need to... I say we all, it's just me tonight. It's a Friday night. Bad night for tribute shows, I guess, because no one else... volunteered to be here with me, so at the moment it's just me, but that's it's an advantage to all of you, to anyone who happens to be listening live, and God bless you. But if you would like to call in, again, if I had someone else here with me or a couple of other people, not necessarily the most appropriate thing to take calls, but since I'm alone, I can absolutely take calls. If anyone out there has a memory, a favorite role, things about the, Alan Rickman that they want to talk about, here I am. Here's a show for the next hour. All right, if you want to call in, and I don't normally ask, for a bunch of shows I do take live callers. This will go a lot easier for me if someone out there would call in, because again, talking for an hour just to myself, not the best for the listeners, not the best for my voice. So if anyone out there is thinking about it, I would encourage you to do so. The number to call in is 323-657-0901. Once again, 323-657-0901. If you want to call in using Skype, on the Blog Talk Radio player page, there is a Skype icon. It's at the top of the player. It used to be just about centered. Now it's a little bit more to the right. You click on that, there's going to be 3 or 4 boxes of dialogue you're going to have to click through, but once you do all that, it will get you into my switchboard. I'll get you on the air. If you call in using a landline or a cell phone, just know your area code. That's how I'll identify you. I don't have a producer or someone to screen calls for me, so just please know your area code. And if you use Skype, you have my word, I will not read out your entire Skype handle because privacy. All right. So with that bit of housekeeping out of the way. Ah, man, this one sucked. This one really sucked for me. Alan Rickman... he was in so many movies that I saw. Now, that may not mean... I got to date myself just a little bit here. You see, back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not that old. I suppose that's a matter of perspective, but I'm not that old. But I can remember a time when the internet was not ubiquitous, when you had a wall of VHS tapes that you could select from. Yes, I predate DVDs. God help me. I also fondly remember, looking through video rental stores like Blockbuster or Hollywood, and all gone the way of the dodo. All of those things. Man, that's sad. Sad might be the wrong word, but the point being that if you're around about my age, you are aware of a couple of things. One is a very limited selection of films to watch. I've got a tab open on my computer right now to Netflix, and I have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of films, television shows, again, documentaries or whatnot at my fingertips. I also have a deep appreciation for, what that means when I have deep memories of looking at, 24 movies arranged in a wooden shelf and trying to figure out, well, which one of these do I want to rewatch this evening? And Alan Rickman was actually in quite a few of those movies. Not all of them, but quite a few. For example, probably the one that I watched the most as a kid, and you'll have to forgive my younger, innocent self, who's just didn't understand so many things. But one of the movies that I watched frequently as a child was, and I'm aware the movie itself is it's not the best telling of this particular story, but Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves tended to feature quite prominently in my childhood viewing experience. Because again, you only have so many movies, you cycle through them, you find stuff that you like watching. Not the best version of the Robin Hood story by any stretch of the imagination. But Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham was one of the first villains that really stood out to me as a kid, even into a teenager, just, again, lack of options in a lot of ways. Again, non-ubiquitous internet, and even DVDs when they started coming out. That transition from VHS to DVD, while smooth in many ways, had some issues, because for a long time, DVDs were borderline prohibitively expensive for my family, so there was still a lot of VHS going on. And again, him as the Sheriff of Nottingham was just one of those things that I watched a lot as a kid, and in many ways kind of stuck with me. It was it's an odd performance from Rickman. I don't mean odd in off-putting or anything like that, because the man was an absolute professional. It's odd in the sense that it almost doesn't quite belong in that movie, because so much of it's a very action-oriented, somewhat goofy movie, but you've got Morgan Freeman and Alan Rickman both in it, and they can kind of counterbalance Kevin Costner just being there. I frequently cite, The Lion King as the movie that kind of started my obsession with villains, both in screen, literature, and whatnot, and looking at things from their perspective, because Scar so fascinated me. This movie, again, Prince of Thieves had a lot to do with that as well, because Alan Rickman, there's times when he just, I don't want to say hams it up, but he is gloriously over the top. At other times, he's completely understated. And it's odd to talk about. It's a very odd movie in many ways. If you haven't seen it, I believe it is currently up on Netflix, so available for streaming. So by all means, if you have the time to kill and don't have some deep aversion to Kevin Costner, not the worst way you could kill, 2 hours, give or take. But that was one of the things that I think kind of influenced my path into, looking at, the villain's perspective, understanding things from their point of view, because you cheer when he dies. He's not a complicated villain in the sense that, maybe you sympathize with him or anything along those lines. He's the bad guy. He's supposed to be the bad guy. He's the bad guy from the word go. And you're happy when he dies. Spoiler alert. Yeah, he dies. And there's such a glorious simplicity in that. But I think one of the things that kind of captivated me about that performance in particular, and this is something that Mark and I talked a little bit about when reviewing The Hateful Eight, there are actors who know how to do more than read lines of dialogue. They understand the whole body as a method of conveying something. Specifically, there's a sequence, a couple of lines of dialogue from Kurt Russell in The Hateful Eight that ends with him twirling his glorious mustache. And that's one of those things that you're not going to write into a script. You don't write that he finishes this sentence with a flourish of facial hair. You don't write it in. The actor does it because they feel it. Rickman's physical acting in Prince of Thieves was really, really fascinating. There's one sequence in that still gets thrown around my house as a joke. After Robin Hood has started, stealing from him, he is clearly upset. He's walking around one of the dungeons, a room in the castle. He smacks himself a couple of times, hits a table, stabs repeatedly at a plate with a knife. This kind of flurry of frustration without a line of dialogue, just, venting frustration as people are prone to do. And the woman, the old witch that raised him, after this flurry of activity, just very blandly says, "Something vexes thee." And it's a great dry line of dialogue to begin with, but his reaction to what she said, again, it's physical acting, so I can't do it justice with words. But it is the most perfect physical representation of every time someone asks an obvious question. I mean, more so than face palming, more so than eye rolling, the way he just kind of throws his head to the side and just wishes, you can see it in his face. He's wishing for pain to be visited upon everyone who is aggravating him at that moment, which happens to be everyone. And conveying that, again, he does all that without saying a single word. It's the type of thing you only get from experience, and it's not something that every actor is capable of. And he has a really interesting sword fight with Kevin Costner. Not one of the best sword fights ever committed to film or anything, but it's funny because he's using a very heavy broadsword. And I don't know if this was deliberate by the filmmaker or by Rickman or whatnot, but he is wielding this heavy broadsword relative to what Kevin Costner's using, which is a lighter version. Again, these are medieval swords, not rapiers or anything. If you're thinking about this was a kind of a Buster Douglas swashbuckling style, no, these are medieval long swords, and it becomes very clear that this sword is much heavier than Robin's, and that plays into elements of the sword fight. But Rickman throws himself and his body and the weapon around like it's heavier, and not in a comical way. In the way that if you've ever had a sledgehammer or an iron bar or something that you're swinging for work and it's heavier than you're used to, your whole body has to get into it. And the momentum can get away from you if you miss your target and all of that. And the reason I bring that up is when you film a sword fight in Hollywood, you don't use a real sword. They're bulky, they're dangerous, and they're very heavy. You have lightweight, blunted versions of those, and a lot of times, again, trained stuntmen do it. Sometimes the actors will learn how to sword fight. Depends on the actor in the film and what, there's a lot of variables there. But the point there is if he's using, in that sequence, a lightweight sword that doesn't weigh as much as he's making it look like it weighs, that's a tremendous physical acting job to believably convey to anyone watching that, yes, this is a heavy sword. And it's one thing to, again, the reason I bring that up is I don't think he was actually using, a 10 to 15 pound broadsword made out of metal. Not when he's swinging to Kevin Costner at any rate. And just to take a lighter weight prop like that and to believably put weight and heft behind it from the audience's perspective is, again, it's tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous. And his death scene is very nice. I actually kind of wanted him to fall out the window instead of just kind of fall over the way he did, but he's also responsible for one of the most famous guy falling out of a window shots of all time, so I think we can forgive Alan Rickman for not taking that particular fall again. I'm going to be honest about part of this. I'm really kicking myself about not getting around to talking about Rickman's career before he passed. For those of you who don't know, normally I have a show on Fridays called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. Now, for a variety of reasons, some of it is, personal, some of it's been timing, some of it's been coming up with ideas, some of it's been personal interest. There's a lot of reasons. That show's been on, kind of off and on hiatus for a while. But I have, for that show, I have a list of actors who kind of made their bones playing villainous roles. I talked about Christopher Lee at length with Pat Mullen, thankfully before he passed. But high on that list was Alan Rickman. And I can't help but think that if I'd actually been, doing this the way I should be, the way I'm supposed to be doing it, doing it week in, week out, I would have touched on his impressive career before he passed, because I really wanted to. And I might in the future. There's every likelihood that you will see in Everyone Loves a Bad Guy devoted specifically to Alan Rickman, because a few of the roles that he did were, iconic isn't even quite the right word. They're that impressive. But talking about his career as a whole like this gives me the opportunity to delve into some of his other roles where he wasn't necessarily a villain, where he wasn't trying to get you to hate him, where he was trying, just playing, he even makes an adaptation of a Jane Austen novel somewhat watchable. And I don't know if you all know this about me, but I have I can't stand the works of Jane Austen. I had to read Pride and Prejudice in high school. I have never read a book that felt so much like a crappy chick flick movie. It just had never occurred to me that existed within that medium. I haven't read Sense and Sensibility, but he's in a movie version of it and does a phenomenal... And again, for all the jokes I make, Jane Austen may not be my personal cup of tea, but Sense and Sensibility in particular, especially compared to Pride and Prejudice, is it's a lot more of a layered piece of work. The character interactions are a lot more different. They're a lot more complicated. A lot more different. Yeah, I studied English extensively, didn't I? They're just different. And he has to portray a man who's in love with a woman who doesn't love him. Now, on the one hand, I think we've all been there, guys, to one degree or another. On the other, to do it so completely believably and trying to find the right way to phrase this. The jokes nowadays about, being friend-zoned and whatnot are one thing, but he is able to take that aspect of the character and make it not sad. It's not worthy of ridicule. It's not pedestrian. It's actually noble and a tad tragic at times. And that, again, that type of position for a character can so easily become either worthy of ridicule or just not sympathetic. There's all kinds of ways it can go. And for him to walk that line as an actor and keep you invested in his character and sympathetic to him. It's an exceptional. It doesn't happen that often. And again, he's one of the few people who can make me interested in Jane Austen material. And let me be clear, not even zombies can get me interested in most Jane Austen material. For those of you wondering why I brought that up, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies will be out in a couple of weeks. 3 weeks, I think. I'll have to look up the exact date. But Mark and I will be reviewing that. Yeah, that's going to be a rough one. February is a rough month, guys. There's Kung Fu Panda 3, which may or may not suck. Then there's Deadpool, which... And I think Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is in there somewhere around Valentine's Day because, you know, Jane Austen, Valentine's Day, So, again, for Alan Rickman to be able to actually keep me invested through watching parts of that, it's no mean feat. I also, man... This is going to sound weird, guys. I owe Alan Rickman in many ways a lot. Because he was in a movie that did okay financially. But I saw it and first of all, I laugh at it every time I see it. Called Galaxy Quest. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, I would encourage you to do so. It is on Netflix as well. It's a really amusing kind of send-up of the science fiction on television. It's aimed at Star Trek, but it's not. But it's a really interesting, and again, it's a very funny movie, and I have seen it a lot. Now, why, might you ask, have I seen it so frequently? Did I like it that much? No. I like it. I still laugh at it when I watch it, but it's not one of my all-time favorite movies. But I owe that movie a debt of gratitude. You see, I've mentioned before that I am the oldest of 4 brothers. Now, my immediately younger brother is 2 years, give or take, younger than me. I forget exactly. 18 months to 2 years, somewhere in there. Then there is a 13-year gap between him and between brother number 2 and brother number 3. Well, technically it's brother 2 and it's brother 1 and brother 2, but again, there's a substantial gap between the second child and the third child, and then there's a fourth one about a year after that. But there's this huge gap. Again, 15 years, give or take. So as a 15-year-old, I was about 15 at the time. 13? 13, 15, somewhere between 13 and 15. I'd have to do the math to remember exactly, and I don't feel like doing math. Having, infant to 2-year-old children around you when you're a teenager is an interesting experience. I say interesting because there are positives and negatives. One of the most interesting things is when that child doesn't want to sleep. Anyone out there who has kids, you're probably nodding your heads right about now, aren't you? When you want the kid to sleep, and they won't sleep from whatever, maybe it's nap time, maybe it's night, maybe it's 3:30 in the morning and they just woke up. And I've done that too. Both of my youngest brothers, one of them more so than the other, if I wanted them to sleep for whatever reason, Galaxy Quest. I could put them on the couch, I could put them, on the floor in front of it, whatever. And they both loved watching the movie, but it would knock them out. So I have a huge, huge place in my heart for that movie because it has saved me on numerous times. Numerous occasions when I was either at my wit's end or it was late or what have you. And the antics of Tim Allen, Alan Rickman, Sigourney Weaver, Tony Shalhoub, Sam Rockwell, just would knock them out every time. And it was a movie that they could put on that I could either have in the background and enjoy, or actually sit down and watch and laugh at, and not want to pull my eyes out of their sockets. As there are the occasional movies that apply to kids that make you want to pull your eyes out. But fortunately, both of my those two were happy with that movie. It would put them to sleep. And since I'm talking specifically, first of all, that movie is proof, along with the first Santa Claus movie, that when Tim Allen actually cares and puts forth a little effort, he is a lot talented than most people give him credit for. But Alan Rickman plays an interesting character in that. He plays, I forget, again, the movie itself is about a cast of actors that were in a short-lived but, popular on the underground science fiction television series about space travel. Again, this is aimed at Star Trek. And so I know the name of the character that he plays on that show, but I can't remember the full name of the actor that he plays. I think it's Alexander Dane. But he plays a character called Dr. Lazarus, who is an alien, has a prosthetic headpiece on. And this character of Alexander Dane, who is an actor, was apparently a very well-received Shakespearean actor on the, in theaters. And he is dealing with his utter frustration at being forever known as Dr. Lazarus. I'm sure there are many actors out there that can sympathize with having to typecast or remembered only for one role and being unable to get past it. I mean, one of the first times we're introduced to him, he's backstage at a convention with the rest of the cast, and he is lamenting his status. He's looking at himself in the mirror and going, I played Richard III. There were 4 curtain calls. I used to be an actor once. Now look at me. I'm not going to go out there and say that stupid line one more time. Now, as with all science fiction shows, everyone has a bit of a catchphrase. Not, hammy or over the top necessarily, but everyone has something they say. I mean, Bones on Star Trek had, I'm a doctor, not a whatever. There was live well and prosper, live long and prosper, excuse me. All the Star Trek nerds are going to want my head. But his character in this show has a line of significance for him. It's apparently some kind of an oath that he takes called it's by Grabthar's hammer. And that's what everyone remembers. That's what everyone wants him to say. And for a thespian actor to be bottled into something like this, it is like slowly killing him. He tries to sneak out of the convention in a trench coat. I cannot. If you have a sense of humor about those things, I really have to say, go watch that movie because parts of it are just hilarious. And again, everyone else around him will say it. And there's this one moment, and again, Alan Rickman's physical acting. And this is something that I've talked about in the past. A truly great, a truly experienced actor, they don't just use their face or their voice to express something to you. They can use their whole body. And Alan Rickman absolutely had that down to a T in this movie, because there's one scene where the group is getting together to open up a car dealership. They're all getting paid to show up there. And you can tell he doesn't want to be there. He's looking, very disinterested, and his line that he's supposed to say to this crowd is, by Grabthar's hammer, what a savings. And the way he acts physically, first of all, he's a beat late getting to it, and one of the other cast members has to elbow him into saying it, and just the tone and pitch of his voice, the pacing of how he says it, and just the way the air just seems to fall out of him as he says it. Like, just fine, here's another little piece of my soul. It really, again, it has to be seen. because the physical way he would act is just it's amazing. It's just amazing. As anyone who's had a job that they maybe didn't like, you know those moments. Those moments when you have to do something you really don't want to do. Your boss is after you for maybe one time too many, and you just kind of want to throw something, but you can't because you're being paid. And that feeling when that part of your spirit dies, your shoulders sag a little bit, you sink a little bit, your whole posture changes just fine. Part of me is slowly dying, but you pay me on time, so I suppose I have to keep doing it. I've not seen a better visual representation of that feeling than that scene from Alan Rickman in that movie. It's really odd. Not odd. It's really impressive, and it's odd that it would be so memorable from that movie. Out of all the other stuff he does in that movie, because he does a lot of stuff, his interplay with Tim Allen in particular, because they kind of go back and forth as castmates who don't really get along. There's a lot of it's really fun interplay between them. It's really well written. I mean, again, I have to kind of say, please go see watch the movie. It's on Netflix if you haven't seen it, and if you have seen it, watch it again. I need to watch it again. It's been a while since I've seen it. And one of the things I suppose that so impresses me about Alan Rickman in that movie and the rest of his career, really it's his versatility. This is a guy who could do anything. I mean, he's played, again, he's most famous for his villainous roles. Again, Sheriff of Nottingham, most famously probably Hans Gruber, depending on which generation you're from. Because depending on which generation you're from, it's either Hans Gruber or it's Severus Snape. For me, it's Hans Gruber. But I was born in 1985, and Die Hard was, prominently featured in my younger days as a rerun on either television or, video rental. So him being, the cold-blooded, intellectual, German bank robber Hans Gruber is predominantly featured in my mind when I think of Alan Rickman. But he could go from being like that, someone you want to see fall off a building, someone who you have, no patience for, to someone you can absolutely, cheer for under the right circumstances. A lot of guys don't have that versatility. They don't have the ability to believably and effectively be both hero and villain. And Hans Gruber is another one of those characters that, first of all, forever lives in popular culture for anyone who's seen the movie. And by the way, just brief aside, if you're listening to this and you have not seen Die Hard, what is wrong with you? Something has gone very wrong in your life to this point, unless you're 3, and this is being used to soothe you to sleep, in which case I apologize. Nothing's wrong with you yet. Probably will get there if this is being used to lull you to sleep, but hey, if it works. But again, Hans Gruber is such a really interesting character because you see him slowly become more and more unhinged as the movie goes on. He has a very specific plan. It's a very specific plan to steal all of this money. He has everything worked out down to a science. He knows, okay, this is what we're going to do. The police will become involved at this, point A. The FBI will become involved at point B. Then, they're actually going to turn off power, which will open up the vault and give us access to all of the money anyway. So thank you very much to the federal government for giving away more money. And this is how we're going to get away with it, because so many people ignore the getting away with it part. And his plan is, it's almost foolproof. The only thing that stops him is, a variable, that is John McClane. And the chemistry and the interplay between those two, just over the radio, ignoring some of the greatness that is Alan Rickman's or Hans Gruber's rather, improvised Southern accent on the spur of the moment to try and keep John McClane from shooting him. Just their interplay over the radio, when there's, they're not physically in the room with each other, but the chemistry that they have. I mean, first of all, I really need to mention this again. Die Hard is one of about 3 or 4 perfect movies. And you can debate a few of them, but Die Hard, Raiders of the Lost Ark, depending on one's perspective, I suppose, The Godfather. Again, there's a couple of other slots that get a little bit murky. I'm personally starting to consider adding Mad Max Fury Road to that list, but that's just me. Other people I know have already firmly ensconced it in that particular hierarchy, but to see Hans go from the very cool, very collected, very organized, methodical planner that he is in the beginning of the movie to near the end of it, as he is, now starting to kind of desperately pile up the money in exchange for them to get away, and he's just coming undone at the seams because John McClane just won't go away. They have to blow up the roof early, and then they're scrambling to get out with their money, and he loses patience with John's wife. He snaps at her, and that's something that is so. If you take again his introductory sequences and pair them up with some of his final ones, there's a stark contrast in demeanor, in personality, and for an actor to believably go through all of those phases is really impressive. The way he tries to keep his composure together as John McClane keeps screwing things up. No, it's not a big deal. This is just inconvenient timing. Relax, he's up there, he can't do anything, and then it keeps getting more and more out of his hands, and his frustration level grows and grows, and that's, again, believe it or not, that's not as easy to portray on screen as you'd think it is. Degrees of frustration as they grow to believably show the steps along the way. Again, not something you see all that often. A lot of guys go from hot to cold like snapping your fingers. And sometimes, there are certainly people that do that in real life, and certain characters are supposed to be written that way. But to watch him, try to hang on to his plan as long as humanly possible, and to think on his feet. Hans Gruber is a fascinating character anyway, and again, when I get around to doing Everyone Loves a Bad Guy just on Alan Rickman, I'm going to talk about him in greater detail. But, and again, the other thing I think you get with Die Hard is a bit of the physical acting that Rickman does. But to go back to his versatility, to go from, he does Die Hard, which is, it's an action movie. Glorious, glorious action movie. Not too long after that, he has a very eclectic filmography. He does big blockbusters. He also does smaller, either independent or small stuff that would challenge him as an actor. There's one really odd little movie called Closet Land, which I actually think is on YouTube at this point. It's basically a 2-person show. It's Alan Rickman and it's Madeleine Stowe. And it deals with Madeleine Stowe being interrogated by Rickman. It's meant to, in many ways, you kind of touch on, political prisoners in police nations and some of the interrogation methods they use. And what strikes me about Rickman's performance there, and Madeleine Stowe is fine. Rickman does another kind of slowly coming unhinged at the seams in that movie. He starts out very much calm, very cool, very collected, very intellectual, very in control. And then as the film goes on, he starts losing his composure, slips every now and then. He starts kind of slowly. It's a weird dichotomy to see his character start losing his cool while Madeleine Stowe gains it, even though she's the prisoner and he's the interrogator. But his versatility is on display here because he actually it's always him, but he takes on many different roles in order to extract information from Stowe. He after she's blindfolded, he pretends to be a fellow prisoner. He pretends to be different interrogators. I mean, he just goes through all of these different characters, and he physically throws himself around to get the desired effect. It's a really, again, the movie, it's as a film on the whole, it's a very odd movie. There's positives and negatives. Rickman's performance is certainly an exceptional one in many ways. And it's really, I mean, I think he's mentioned it in the past that he would do that as kind of a way of staying mentally, emotionally, and kind of spiritually healthy. He could do big blockbusters, but if something smaller that caught his interest came along, he would do that. He spent a lot of time in theater on Broadway. Good friend to the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, Benjamin Colon, shared a really nice story about Mr. Rickman. And I mean, that's his. I'm not going to repeat it. But again, just when he was on Broadway, and I mean, there are certainly Hollywood actors who make time to do theater. Harry Connick Jr. does, I believe. Hugh Jackman does. It's far from unheard of. But it's just not a terribly common occurrence. And again, it's really a real testament to his abilities, because acting on stage is very different from acting in front of a camera. Film acting is done multiple takes. We do it as long as it takes to get it right. We have multiple takes from different angles, and we edit it together. Whereas on stage, it's you're there, you're live, you're one and done. Just a very different process. And he, again, was great everywhere. When I heard he had been cast as Severus Snape, again, slightly dating myself here, but I was in junior high when the Harry Potter books were first being released. So I was part of... I'm not the biggest fan of them, necessarily. I enjoy them, certainly, but I'm not an obsessive fan. But when they started making, they announced they were going to make some movies a few years later. Naturally, the books were such a huge hit and lent themselves so readily to being adapted in so many ways. I mean, when they announced Rickman was playing Snape, you can't do better. I could not possibly have even just fantasy casting. I don't think I could have done better. And I mean, again, and then of course, the movie comes out. I actually get to watch him be Snape, and that's, man. And again, for those of you who may be looking back at this after the fact, a lot of the movies were released before. The first few movies were made prior to the last books being released. And Snape was always kind of an enigmatic character and remained so until, the very end when you actually found out what was going on with him. So watching him, act this character that, I had a very clear vision in my head of what he was like as I would read the books. And in some ways, Snape, Alan Rickman's version differed from what I saw in my head, but at this point I can't read them without seeing or hearing Alan Rickman. It's just, I mean, it really is a great performance of a very interesting character. I mean, Severus Snape is, again, a very interesting character, very layered, very different character, especially at the, and I suppose what fascinates me most about it is he kept the consistency of the character from start to finish, and he was able to do it with all the, it's a very different experience rewatching them or rereading those books, knowing what you know at the end. A lot of things take on different meaning. And he was able to, as an actor, help keep that up with the written material. I maintain, by the way, first of all, the fact that Alan Rickman was never nominated for an Oscar just boggles my mind. I can think of, a couple of performances that should have at least been nominated. The fact that he was not nominated for the second part of the eighth Harry Potter movie, the fact that he didn't get a nomination for Best Supporting Actor out of that, it blows my mind. Just watching that movie, that one in particular, because take these individually, the range of emotion that he believably conveys, the fact that in one instance you dislike him. I mean, because a lot of those movies are just, generally speaking, very well made. And even if you know how those movies, how the story ends, there are still times in that movie when you don't like him. You still, oh God, you're still such a pain. And he believably does that, and then to when you feel sympathy for him, even before you see his backstory, just as he's dying. The range of emotion, the physical acting, it's the restraint, because that's a very restrained character for a variety of reasons. And to show that kind of restraint while still being able to slip in the bits of duality, just an absolutely phenomenal. I can't say this about every time he was Snape on film or the finished product, but that last one was a really great bit of filmmaking. Not just filmmaking, a really great bit of acting from him. And it's it's a crying shame that one didn't get nominated. Man, I can't say it's a tragedy because I hate the overuse of that word. I really, really do. It's very sad, thinking about him being gone. Because, again, personally, 3 or 4 different roles that he did were staples of my childhood and my teenage years, and in some cases, my adult years. Jeez. Didn't realize that until just about now. But a lot of people who knew him have written some very nice things about him. And again, from everything that's been said, I never met him personally. But from everything that I've read and heard, we're all a little poorer for his not being here. Certainly as a fan of film as I am, and that he's not going to be around anymore, it really sucks. No, I'm not going to lie about that. All right, let me see if I've hit everything I wanted to talk about. I should bring this up. When speaking about his, versatility, I have never seen the movie Dogma. And I will tell you why, because I don't care for the films of Kevin Smith. I understand all of you that do. I am not decrying them as bad. Some of them. Not all of them. The ones it doesn't appeal to me. His movies just they don't strike a chord with me. I don't find them amusing. So I just have learned, all right, people who like his movies continue to enjoy them. Most of them are, again, the vast majority of them are well made, well written to varying degrees. But when you consider just for a moment that, again, Alan Rickman, known for serious roles by and large, could be in something as goofy as Dogma, and somehow managed to be both, to fit right in with the goofiness. And I haven't seen the whole movie. I've seen parts of it at various points in my life for various reasons, either on television or just, out with friends, whatever. But from some clips online, he manages to fit in with the goofiness of parts of that movie, but at the same time, when he says to, our protagonist in that movie, by the way, you've got to stop a couple of angels from ending all existence, there's some gravity to that. And it's the weirdest thing in the world to have some gravity brought into that type of movie. It really is just odd, but it fits. And to him, as a credit to him as a professional, he went into a somewhat goofy Kevin Smith movie and never phoned it in. He didn't just show up, read dialogue, collect a paycheck, move on with life. He actually put forth effort into, well, he's not actually God, but he is, the Metatron, I think? Yes. I'm not sure what that is. But that's what my notes have told me. And he has got one of the most hilarious one-episode runs in King of the Hill comes from him. He plays a king at a Renaissance fair, and he speaks in his normal voice with his normal accent for the vast majority of this, and they enter because he has a giant fire-breathing dragon that he trots out for his Ren fair, and he wants, Hank Hill is there to sell him propane to fuel it. That's how we get there, and then it turns out he's basically method acting, so he's mistreating a lot of his employees, specifically the women. And then right at the end, he gets served with legal papers from the women who work for him at this fair. And slowly his English accent drops. Now, again, to Alan Rickman, that's his normal speaking voice. But to the character, he goes from a king to just a very obvious kind of South Texas accent. And it's the oddest thing in the world to hear him go from normal Alan Rickman to, crap, I'm going to lose my fair. And just to bring that bring that to a voice role on King of the Hill, which certainly has some hilarious moments, but again, not necessarily anything of quality like a lot of the other stuff he's done. But just to show up and be a professional about it, to give your best, and that's probably the best celebrity cameo, guest appearance in all of King of the Hill, with a possible exception being made Pitt as Boomhauer's brother. But I think that's about it. And I would still give the edge to Alan Rickman. The last two I want to talk about. One of which I haven't seen, but I've been told is great. Again, on his versatility, this time back to a villainous role, there's a fun little... It's a Western in style, but it's actually set in Australia. Movie starring Tom Selleck called Quigley Down Under. Alan Rickman plays the villain, who is trying to drive off the Aborigines. Just a bad guy. Pretty stereotypical Western bad guy. But he's I believe he plays a Brit. I have to rewatch the movie. who is in Australia at kind of the behest of his company. And he is obsessed with the American West. He has a complete reconstruction of the OK Corral on his property. Fancies himself a gunslinger. And watching him play off of Tom Selleck is actually quite interesting because I like Tom Selleck, but he's best served in roles where he can be a bit of a minimalist. And that's not an insult. That's an acknowledgement of his strengths. So him, being, having a lot of brevity as far as that goes, just short responses to, Alan Rickman's slightly more gregarious ones. Just a really, again, you have to have kind of a taste for those movies, but it's a really fun, and certainly, and again, his performance as a wannabe cowboy villain is very interesting. I haven't seen all of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I've seen, I think, the beginning of it. But he voices a character that I have a friend who loves the book very much, and actually likes the movie as well. But the character of Marvin the Paranoid Android is voiced by Alan Rickman. And I again, the bit of it that I saw did not get to where that character features. But I am aware of some of the quotes from that character. Again, I have friends who like the book a lot. And just bringing his, not just his voice, but timing, his wit to an exceptionally depressed android. Everyone who's seen it has told me it's great. The movie itself is supposed to be very good, but for some reason hasn't quite caught on. I'll have to watch. I mean, it's got a great cast. I mean, Martin Freeman is in it. I think Mos Def, and Mos Def is not a bad actor. Of course, Mos Def and Alan Rickman starred together in a made-for-TV movie or miniseries. Can't remember which one. One of those two, called Something the Lord Made. It was an HBO. Might have been an HBO made-for-TV movie. Worth looking up. I forget exactly where it started from, but great performances out of both of them. Mos Def is not a bad actor. I think the last thing... Yeah, it's here. I'm looking at it. His last theatrical release will be... Oh, boy. When Tim Burton did Alice in Wonderland a few years ago, personally, I don't care for the movie. He got a great cast together, including Alan Rickman as the Caterpillar, Absalom. He apparently reprised that role for the upcoming sequel, Through the Looking Glass. Not sure how I feel about that being his last role, because again, I just don't care much for the movies. But I don't care for the first one. The next one hasn't been released yet, obviously. All right, and my live time's about to run out, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Personally, I'm going to feel not having him around, not being able to enjoy his talent in the future. I can rewatch past roles, but so soon on the heels of David Bowie, which didn't hit me personally all that much, but I know a lot of people that it did. Lemmy dying at the end of last year. We're just off to a great start for this year, aren't we? All right. As a matter of plugs, real briefly, there will be no 411 Ground and Pound radio show this Sunday. There is UFC Fight Night 81 that I will be covering instead. We'll be back the week after for that one. So thanks to everyone who listens to that. As always, you can like the Radulich Broadcasting Network on Facebook. That is the best way to consistently receive updates and get our schedule. On that note, I'm out. I'm going to close with the music that I opened with. This is actually the song that plays over Snape's memories in Deathly Hallows Part 2. I think it's also used for Dumbledore's death. I would have to double check that, but until then, geez. To anyone who knows where Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen might be, keep them safe. Because, yeah, we don't need that. All right. That wraps me up. I am done. Until next time, as we usually say here, again, some shows close differently, but the normal sign out for the Radulich Broadcasting Network is please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.